Welcome to this part of the course where we're looking at teaching very young learners and adults. So a lot to cover, but a lot of useful information for us as teachers. So by the end of this, we will have increased our knowledge and skills in the classroom. Children are very clever, very clever. And sadly, very sadly for us, they don't need teachers. It's true, it's true, but don't tell anyone. Children don't need teachers. When they're born, they are already born with an awareness of the sounds that they hear while they're in their mother's tummy. They are born with a brain and a desire to learn and make meaning of language. All they need is meaning, sound, and love. Because in a loving relationship with a parent, they have a very profound desire to learn in order to communicate. And this is very important in terms of language teaching and learning. Children learn by listening, and a lot of listening. And with active brains in listening, they're trying to make meaning in language. And they do it. And they do it because they want to have a workable, real, functional relationship with someone in their world. When we take that away from children, their language learning goes down. And in fact, their brain development goes down. But for us, as language teachers and learners, we know that the most important thing, that's two actually, the most important thing is that they're born with a desire and a need to communicate. When they're having that communication, they try and develop systems of rules, and those rules are informed by sound. So they hear sounds, they see things, they make meaning, and they try and generate rules. So they hear sounds, they see meaning, and they try and generate rules. They're not learning grammar from a book, yeah? They're using their own clever brains to figure out what the language is like, what the sounds are like, and fundamentally what the grammar is. They do that naturally, absolutely naturally. And when they're doing it, they go through a preordained series of stages. So children will learn certain things first, second, third, fourth, and so on. And as they acquire language, as they grow in that acquisition, they go through certain specific language acquisition stages. As teachers, we need to know that because that staging will inform how we teach in the classroom, because it is the structure within which they acquire language. These clever little creatures are no different from any other animal. All animals want to learn. All animals need to learn in order to develop successfully. But we are different. Humans are different. Humans are special because we have language. And within that language, we can encode a lot of meaning. We can encode a lot of meaning about what things are out there in the world, how we name things. Yeah, very important. And we can also use that language to enrich and deepen relationships. So that learning part of being human is fundamental and very important. Piaget, Vygotsky, many others have told us that it is a natural desire to learn that makes us who we are, and it's also the influence of intelligent adults that we interact with that make us successful human beings. So we interact with others, we interact specifically so that we can achieve more in the world, be a more functional part of that world, and have really good relationships. So we use language, we experience success in that language, and the success that we experience in that language drives our desire to use it. Now you are probably going, aha, so if this is what children do, if this is how children feel, if this is how children are designed, then I should teach in a way that is going to work best for that kind of animal. These little creatures that we call children develop a lot of knowledge in the first 2 or 3 years of their life. So they are very busy. They are learning so much about the world. They're learning about their hands, they're learning about their bodies, they're learning about coordination, they're learning about relationships, they're learning about tastes, smells, and so on and so on. So a huge amount of learning in which they experience the world and make meaning of it. So major learning time for a child. One of the key things that they acquire early is naming things. And we know why they want to name things, because in naming things there is influence, there is power. When you can name something, you can say bottle, as in I need some more milk. Yeah, so a very important step to go and name things. They can develop, and they do develop, quite an extensive vocabulary, like 500 words, much more than my vocabulary in Chinese. But it will get better. They will repeat things and repeat things, and as teachers we know that the repetition is one of the fundamentals of learning, and kids are doing that because they know that they want to remember them. They will move towards grammaticality in the sense that they can substitute nouns with pronouns. So rather than saying a person's name, they can say he or she. Very cool. They can learn, or will have learned, directions and will respond to directions like come here, go there, that sort of thing. So great step forward there. They also learn what questions, and that's very impressive, isn't it? Imagine that you have learned the sound what and the words that go after it that will enable you to ask questions. So not only are you learning about the world, you're learning how to interact with it. So big step forward. They can use 2 to 3 word sentences, not necessarily fantastic grammar, but in a general grammatical order, if you like. They can do things like point to their eyes, their nose, their ears. So that's quite a useful piece of thing to be able to do. They also will respond to name when you call them. They will respond by name. They can repeat things as they hear them. And that means that they're listening and logging, if you like, in order to repeat. They will also love songs, stories, chants, all the things that you know are an essential part of learning. And we know that in those songs we get melody, we get words, we get meaning. In chants and little dance, we're also developing a really good set of knowledge of the world. At this stage too, children will also be really interested in books. Now, that doesn't mean that you are teaching them to read. What it means is they're getting exposure to sounds, to symbols, to pictures, and they are actively putting all of that together so that they can develop their awareness and skills in language. Children continue with that fairly rapid development. So by the age of 3 or 4, they've got a vocabulary of 1,000 words. That's amazing, isn't it? And almost all those words they have learned by themselves. They have figured out the meaning. Sure, they get a bit of help from their loving interaction with parents, but it's largely their own brains that have figured out the meaning. So a major step forward for them there. They're also moving towards real command of language, so they can put 3 to 5 word sentences together, and you can put a lot of meaning in 3 to 5 word sentences. They have also learned prepositions, so they can identify where things are, and clearly if you want to influence the world or understand the world, knowing where things are is important. So prepositions like over, on, under, on, in, they have got some degree of mastery of. They're also continuing with the theme of repetition. So they will repeat because they know, like you and I know, that practice makes perfect. They will also be able to ask who, what, where, and why questions. Now that's amazing, isn't it? So when asking those questions, they really are fully interacting with the world. They're finding out information about the world, and in that information, they are also developing control. Very impressive stuff. They will like listening intensely, very, very closely to stories that you read them or tell them. Yeah, they love doing that, and they learn a lot from that, because in those stories, they're not just words, there are messages about life and meaning. But don't be tempted to change the words for fun. Yeah, you can do that later. A very useful exercise for listening when they're older, but not when they're at that age. They also love rhyme. Yeah, and we know that they should like rhyme, because language is all about sound and rhyme is all about sound. Later in the course, we will also look at a whole bunch of rhymes that kids like to use. So also they like to sing, and children singing is quite a delight. Yeah, you listen to a child singing, there's something very beautiful in it. As a teacher, beware that if you have a low voice, perhaps best not to use that as a model. Kids really need to sing with a relatively high range, and it's difficult for them to copy a voice if it's a low range. They will also develop a vocabulary of colors, so they can do red, yellow, green, blue. Important in terms of measuring distinctions in meaning. Yeah, big step forward from them there. And also they will really like stories, so they will like listening to stories, but more importantly, they get to the point where they have learned so much about stories, they have learned the structure of stories, they will like to start telling them. And you know that as a teacher, that's a really good thing for you to incorporate in the classroom, giving kids the opportunity to listen to stories and then maybe tell them, retell them, or reconfigure them in some way. Kids keep learning, and when they're hitting around the age of 4 or 5, they have developed some considerable skills. Part of the contribution to those considerable skills is what parents do. In this age group, children probably have achieved in a Western educated context. The children probably have heard their parents read to them about 1 million words. So a lot of exposure in terms of sound and meaning. And of course, what that does mean is that when the kids go to school where they may learn to read properly, they've already got considerable phonic awareness. So at this stage, kids are doing some reading, probably not fluently, but doing some reading, and they're also developing some of their writing skills, so maybe name writing and the like. This, it's very variable, but largely speaking, around this age, kids are doing things like some reading and a little bit of writing. They've also continued their skills in terms of questioning, and they've added what if questions to that. So that means that kids at 4 to 5 are already thinking about unreal things, about possible things. So pretty fascinating in terms of their world view. They're also continuing with their love of song and rhyme, and one of my favorites is a rhyme that's popular with kids in a Western context, and it is diddle diddle dumpling, my son John went to bed with his trousers on. One shoe off and one shoe on, diddle diddle dumpling, my son John. What does that mean? I've no idea. Some son went to bed or liked to go to bed with his trousers on, which is a bit strange, and also with some shoe or shoes on. But that sort of nonsense rhyme is very appealing for kids. Kids also develop a sense of register. So they will adjust what they're telling you according to how good they think you are at understanding it. So they will simplify their language if they think you're having trouble with it. So quite a beautiful thing to see. Another thing that kids do at this age as part of their general linguistic mastery is that they can make complex sentences. So they can take a couple of clauses and put them together, add in a conjunction. So grammaticality is quite strong at this age. By the time they get to 6, their vocabulary has hit possibly 2,500 words. And with 2,500 words, you can pretty much understand most of what happens in an everyday situation. So very high level of confidence there. They also, being children, they like a good joke. So they like playing jokes and telling jokes, and jokes that you and I will have trouble understanding. They also like taking that language mastery and having long, elaborate conversations with it. And at this point, you're probably thinking, if that's what children do, then maybe that's what I should do more of in my class, or what I should give them more opportunity for. Their grammaticality by this age is very strong. So they won't produce anything that is ungrammatical. There might be some slight flaws in it, but the syntax will be correct, and overall the grammar will be pretty strong. They will, of course, being children, they will like to test the boundaries. They will use strange or shocking words just to see what effect they have. And that's part of their overall sense of what power there is in learning language. There are plenty of times and opportunities for us as teachers to experiment, explore, develop, and do interesting and innovative things with our learners. Trying to change the order in which things are learned is not one of the things we want to experiment with. Remember that language acquisition and language learning occurs over particular stages, and when you're teaching, get yourself a good syllabus. Whether it's something from one of the international exams or your local syllabus or something like the early youth foundation stages, look at those. Those are really good guidance for the order in which you should teach. Now, when you are teaching and when children are learning, we're probably thinking that it is our duty as teachers to correct students' mistakes, but it's not. What we need to keep in mind is that language learners are creating meaning as they go along. So they're taking sound, they're taking meaning in their physical environment, they're interacting with people, and they are generating their own rules on language. Now, of course, because the inputs they're getting in a language learning classroom is not perfect, yeah, then we need to make sure that we give them more input, but not more correction. Sure, you've got to do some correction, but your job as a teacher is to develop language competence, is to expose your learners to a range of instances of language that is written or spoken in many, many different contexts, and use that to drive learning, not a high degree of attention to grammar and correction. Remember that when you are teaching, you want to provide as much context as you can. Context creates meaning. The more context you give, and this is why stories are so brilliant, because stories come with their own context. Everything in it is interrelated. The characters develop meaning, and their use of language has a richer meaning as a result. So use context. Remember that context is the thing that drives learning, and that children in their mother tongue environment derive all of their meaning from the context in which things occur. Let's also remember that when we are speaking to our learners, when they're being exposed to things, that they will understand much more than they can use. Yeah, so it's very reasonable for you to give them a reading that's above their level. When I say a reading, it might be either text or spoken, but something that's slightly above their level so they can strive to understand it. When you're learning a new language, it's different from learning your mother tongue. When you've got your mother tongue, you have a fresh brain, and into that brain goes systems of sound and systems of lexis and systems of grammar that you learn, amongst a whole lot of other things, cultural things that give your language so much meaning. When you're learning a second language and you're a child learning a second language, you already have a frame. Yeah, and through that frame, you view the new language. So you will interpret the sounds, you will interpret the words according to what you know already. So L1 interference is quite a big factor in what happens when you're learning a second language. As we've mentioned already, the exposure is the biggest solution to that. So make sure that when your learners are learning a new language, that they get a lot of exposure to the new language. To a certain extent, you're trying to replace the language models that they have with new language models. So remember, L1 interference or mother tongue interference is quite real. It will affect how children say things, how they hear things, how they deal with language. Also, when they're learning that second language, the motivation is different. When they're at home, there is a very, very strong motivation for using language to communicate, to be part of the group, to learn knowledge that is valued by everyone in that group. But at school, even though our teachers are wonderful, they are kind, they can't really replace mum or dad. As a teacher, you need to pay special extra effort to how you motivate your learners. How do you encourage them? How do you encourage them to make effort in learning that new language so that they can succeed in it? Another thing we want to consider is that when you are learning a second language, then the method, the approach is not the same as it was with your mother tongue. So you're going to take a different learning set. You've probably got books and a particular syllabus, and you're learning it also in a different environment. And within that different environment, it's difficult to achieve learning language in the same way as you did at home. So there's a challenge for teachers there, how to create meaning and how to create a more natural learning environment in the language classroom. Also, as teachers, sometimes we are not perfect language models. Yeah, sometimes we have strange expressions. Sometimes our pronunciation is not great. Sometimes our language is not perfect. And therefore, it's difficult for us to have natural conversation and to use language in a way that becomes a perfectly natural model for our learners to work with. So that's something else that we need to be aware of. If we think that our language model is not perfect, okay, you can improve it, and we have parts on this course which are designed to help you improve your language model. But also what you can do is, once again, increase the exposure, increase the input, relying on other sources. So you can rely on books that have been read by someone professionally, or videos that have been made professionally, or a good syllabus. So learning a second language is different. And when you're teaching kids who are learning that second language, you need to bear in mind that there are a number of different factors that you have to give extra attention to. One thing that we need to be particularly aware of as teachers is to not make the mistake of having limited input. Sometimes it's possible to see a teacher teach a class in which they focus on 4 words, and they spend the whole lesson teaching those 4 words and revising them and reviewing them. This really is a mistake. What you want to do in any given learning is have a large amount of input. And you want quite a lot of input. Of course, you need attention to that input at various points, and you can take words out, check the meaning, ask about them, drill them, many things. But the key thing is that you've got to have a lot of input. Now that input, and you may be thinking, but they don't understand very much. Yeah, and that's a reasonable concern. But always we tend to understand more than we can use or say. So if we get input for our learners and we make it slightly above their level, then they have to try to figure it out, to decode it, and in decoding it they acquire language. In that effort, and remember we talked about effort earlier, and in that effort to make meaning, they are paying closer attention to sound and words in language. So let's just keep that in mind, that when you're teaching, you need to have a reasonably high level of input, but that input needs to be comprehensible. In other words, it needs to be possible for the children to learn it through the context, through the characters, through what you are doing in the classroom. Now, when you do that, it helps your learners acquire language naturally. I remember some years ago with a teacher called Sis, I think her name was, in Chengdu. And she was teaching a class. And in that class, she taught the whole class in English, and it was all a story about ducks and a mountain. It was a beautifully developed story, and she had little hats for the children to wear. And by the end of that lesson, they had learned so much. And for the entire lesson, they were in the language context of the ducks and the mountain. And that's what you want. You want a large amount of comprehensible input, because that is what helps kids learn naturally. If you learn about art from 3 pictures, then your knowledge of art, your appreciation of art is limited and will probably remain limited for a long time. Now, if you're a language teacher and you want your kids, you want your students to have a broad understanding of language, a broad understanding of meaning and language competence, then your sources should be as wide as possible. So as many picture books as you can, as many videos, audio files, many different things that you can provide for your learners. Choose them so that the sources, the data that they get, is full and wide, and the language model that they develop is based on a wide range of accurate input. So, number one, keep your sources broad and wide. Do not be restricted to one book. The next thing you probably want to be aware of as a teacher is that we as teachers have failings. We tend to adopt a particular manner and a particular style of talking when we're talking to children. Yeah, sometimes it's not real. Yeah, we forget that we can have normal, real, full, meaningful conversations with our kids all the time. So when we're teaching, good to teach the syllabus, good to teach what's required, but make sure you're having a full amount of natural and meaningful conversation with your learners. Be a person, yeah? Sometimes a person is here and a teacher is there. Okay, also remember that interaction, as we have learned, interaction is an essential component of language acquisition. If you're going to acquire a language, you need to interact in it. So you want to create opportunities, as many as you can, for kids to take language that they have learned and use it, or manipulate bits of language that they have learned so that they are interacting with it and ideally interacting with one another. Of course, they're going to interact with you, but when they interact with one another, they're starting to develop their own language community. You want to also ensure that your visual aids are strong. So if you have a video, good, make sure it's suited to your particular level. Make sure that if kids are watching a video, that you have tasks for them to do, not just empty looking at a screen. But your visuals, videos, graphics, all of those are really rich. Videos are very good for providing good context for meaning. Be careful in your selection though. There are a number of videos out there that are very modest in terms of the language skills that they present. Look for good quality videos with good natural voice. Make sure also, and I know that I've mentioned this already and I will mention it again, make sure that they get exposure to lots of stories. Humans all around the world love stories. See if you can make sure that you're reading to your kids, that they're developing an awareness of what words sound like, what stories look like, and see if you can do that in a reasonably intelligent way. So lots of reading, but also make sure that you're giving them some skillful thinking in relation to that reading, not testing them, but asking them questions to help them explore meaning. Because after all, the development of meaning is what you want as a teacher of language. Input needs to be followed by output. If we only give children information or meaningful texts and they don't output it, they don't use anything from what we have given them, then they won't acquire language. So we need to give them opportunities to speak to one another, perhaps do actions that are related to a task in language, perhaps do some writing, or many, many other different things. But they must output in language in order for acquisition to take place. When they respond to something that you have asked them, do remember to ask for more information. Ask them questions so that they think more, so that they consciously try to make their output more comprehensible. They must be trying hard to make clear meaning, and when they're doing that, they're getting their own measure of their own success in language. A wonderful way to do this, and we look at this at various points in the course, is in task repetition. So don't do something once. Yeah, if you've got the kids to do something once, then get them to do it again with a different partner, and again with a different partner. In that task repetition, they're getting to modify their output, they're getting to achieve more in language than they would in one single repetition, because in the task repetition they tend towards greater complexity in language. And of course, if you have a task with another learner and they don't understand you, then you try again. You try and reformulate it or explain it, and that will help drive your language learning. Also, in the classroom, see what opportunities you can create for kids to come to the front and say something. Come to the front, do something, or write something that you put on the board. When you get children to have this kind of public performance, you require them and they require themselves to make their meaning and their language clearer. So in that, you get a drive towards increased accuracy in language use. The other thing that you might want to consider is, if you've given them a task to do and they've done it, well then retask it. See if you can get them to do it in a different way. And you'll see, for example, within the phonics inputs that we have for you, that each and every one of those examples is a different way of doing something with sound. So just to remember here, give students lots of input, but if we want language acquisition, there must also be output, and it must be comprehensible output. So not just a focus on form, but a focus on meaning, and in using that meaning, they're getting some effect for their language. So as teachers, we have things to teach. We know they're good. We know they're part of a sound syllabus. We have planned well, and then we go into the classroom. And then things sometimes fall apart because there are problems with our classroom management. We think it's something to do with our learners not behaving or not paying attention or not focusing, but ultimately what it does mean is that we need to perfect our skills as classroom managers. So in the next few slides, we'll look at some of the key things you can do to get the best learning as a result of being a good classroom manager. We know that if we want to communicate, if we want to express ourselves in some way, then being in an environment which is positive and friendly and warm and engaging goes a long way. Now, especially if you're a child and maybe it's your first day, or you've been there before, or you're a new teacher or some such, we know that for that child coming into a classroom, which is a different environment, they need some little extra help so they feel comfortable in the communication that happens there. We know that language teaching and learning is about communication. We know it's about increasing that desire to use the language that you are teaching in the classroom. So start with a big warm greeting. So not hello, but hello. Yeah, make them feel really welcome. Make sure that when you greet your students, you have a big smile. I'm not very good at big smile. Okay, now maybe, but big smile and an encouraging voice. Yeah, warm smile, encouraging voice. Hello. Yeah, something like that. Big change in pitch is always good for kids. They seem to react better when you've got a range in your voice from high to low. Yeah, when you greet them, make sure you use their names, yeah, individual names. In other parts in the course, we'll talk about the importance of names for classroom management and how important it is for teachers to know everyone's name. So when you greet those kids, name them, yeah. So, hello, Peter. That's not the name, of course, yeah. Or hello, whatever. Hello, Peter. And then some small talk. Oh, Peter, look at your new bag. Whoa, that's so cute. Where did you get that? Yeah, stuff like that, so that the message you're giving is here's one person, the teacher, who wants to communicate with you about real things. Sometimes our challenge as teachers is to let our learners know that language is about real things and not just the vocabulary that we want to present in the classroom. So when you've greeted them and you've made some positive comments about what they're doing, think also about how you can extend that. So not just a simple one-liner, but when they reply, follow it up with more questions, get more detail in there so you're establishing that you've got a good, real relationship. Now, if you have a child who's upset, maybe sore tummy or something like that, or they're just crying and you don't know why, get some help for them really quickly, yeah? Now, obviously that help will be that you'll go to them, maybe sit with them. It can be a challenge if it's only you in the classroom, but maybe you have an assistant who can look after them. But whenever you have an upset child, help them quickly. Of course, there are boundaries here. If the child has behavioral issues, perhaps they want too much attention or some such, then you have to think of different strategies for how you help that child. But the number one rule in classroom management is if a child is actually upset, then you help them quickly. If they're disturbing the class, yeah, then there are a lot of different techniques for dealing with that, like the long stare or ignoring them, that sort of thing. But if a child is upset, help them. So in that environment in which kids arrive, you want them to feel that it's comforting, it's supported, it's friendly, and they have been recognized for who they are. If our learners are motivated, we've achieved a lot already. When learners are motivated, when people are motivated, then they want to achieve, they want to learn more. And one of our big tasks as teachers is to keep our learners motivated. The first and most critical step towards that is obviously your relationship with them. And that relationship starts to make things meaningful. We know that at home with mum and dad and grandma and grandpa, that there is meaning attached to everything. Yeah, everything is important to everyone else, and you want to be part of that because you are part of the family. So there's a lot of meaning in everything at home. For the teacher, you have to figure out how to bring that meaning into the classroom. How do you make it meaningful? So you give your learners tasks, maybe they're learning flashcards, yeah, and they've learned something about a flashcard. Then let them talk to their partner about what they see on the flashcard. Or if you've learned about animals, let them draw animals. Yeah, let them pretend that they are the animal. So when you're doing learning, make sure it's meaningful. And of course, personalize it. When we learn something, it becomes valuable when we use it personally. Yeah. So if I have drawn a horse, which makes it very personal, maybe I can go to another kid and say, this is my horse. Yeah. And talk a little bit about the color, the size, that sort of thing. So when you're motivating, focus on one, your relationship, and two, the meaning that you can bring, and three, how you can make that personal. The other things that you want to consider are how you ensure that there is interaction in the classroom, because we know that if you're a child or a human, yeah, and you're interacting with another person, you get value already. You get a feeling of being valued, and you get a feeling of importance when you communicate and someone else is listening to you. So that's a very important thing to do in the classroom. Make sure that children are interacting with the language that you have introduced for them. So key points there in terms of motivation: make sure that it's driven by your relationship with them, make sure it's meaningful, make sure it's personal, and of course the other factor that we want to consider is not only the interaction, but how much you believe in your learners. How much do you believe that each one of them can be successful? It's very easy for a teacher to ask the questions of the clever kids to get the clever answer, and that's good. But the message that we're giving the other students is that you don't really value the relationship with them. And you don't want to give that message. You want to ensure that you are asking all the kids for their answers, not all the time, but you are actively interested in your personal communication with them and their personal communication with you. Now you want to keep that motivation up, and we've mentioned a number of things that you can do for that. Make sure that you also keep your activities short and varied. We know that kids have got interest in things. They are naturally motivated, but their attention span is quite short. Yeah. So you've got a task, keep it running for a short period of time, watch the group. Yeah, watch how they are talking, watch what their interaction is, watch what their focus is like. And as soon as it starts to drop, at that point, cut the activity and move to something else. Don't wait until it is gone, because at that point, then you get classroom management issues. When learners lose concentration, we have trouble. Yeah. And sometimes getting them back on task is a little bit like herding wild cats, which is a lovely expression in English because you can't herd cats. Yeah. You can herd cows or goats, but not cats, because they all run off in different directions. So when you've got kids in the class, try lots and lots of different techniques to make sure that you keep them concentrated for the entirety of the class. So one of the key drivers, if you like, for students to lose concentration is when you give them a task and they don't understand it. Yeah. And there's an important message in that, yeah, that if you're the teacher, if you're the leader in the classroom and you're communicating and your kids don't get it, they think there's something wrong with the process. And the most natural response to that is to kind of zone out. So when you're giving your instructions, and we mentioned this on a number of occasions on the course, make sure your instructions are clear, simple, and checked. So other thing that might drive loss of concentration is when activities are too boring or too difficult. Yeah, lots of solutions to that. Obviously, the boring one is make sure it's meaningful. If the kids look bored, you have to ask yourself, what was it in the design of this task that did not engage them? What happened to the meaning? How will I next time make sure that that task is engaging them? If it's too difficult, then it could be in relation to either the text, whether it's the task that you want them to do, or the complexity of your instructions for that task. So if the text is too difficult or the task is too difficult, then you need to tone both or one of those down for the next lesson. The other thing that is a normal thing for children is that sometimes they're just tired. You know, after lunch, they're tired. They won't be hungry, but if they're tired, then think of something really nice and quiet that they can do so that you're not fighting against a brick wall. Yeah. So if they're tired, sit them down, read them a story. Yeah. Give them a chance to recover some of their energy before they move on to something else. If they're hungry, poor wee things, if they're hungry, see if you can arrange for them to get a glass of water or a snack or something so that they can concentrate. Children who are hungry will not concentrate on the teaching. Sometimes in teaching you have the unfortunate thing, which is the equipment doesn't work. Yeah, your overhead projector is gone, your whiteboard, interactive whiteboard doesn't work, your computer's lost its connection, Wi-Fi is down, all that sort of stuff. When those things happen, my best advice is run from the room. No, don't do that. If those things happen, then while they are being fixed, and hopefully they can be fixed while you're there, sing songs, do chants, do lots of things that distract the children from the problem at hand. So just as always, as teachers, have nice little backups to get you through things like that. Now, if you've got kids in class and suddenly they're all wanting to speak Chinese with one another, that's not such a big problem. At that point, you probably want to point them towards your list of rules on the board. Yeah. And if they want to speak Chinese, then they need to ask you. Yeah. And you can say, okay, you're speaking Chinese. Let's stop. Let's look at our list of rules. If you want to speak Chinese, what do you need to do? And they go, ask the teacher. And you go, okay, ask me. And they go, can I speak Chinese? And you say, yes, for 1 minute, starting now, go. Yeah, not a good idea to completely confine children to speaking English. A little bit of Chinese break every now and then shows that you're human, shows that you understand that they need a little bit of time out every now and then. And of course, you can monitor what they're talking about, and that can be helpful for you in terms of how you continue with a successful lesson. Whenever you're moving from one stage to the next, or whenever you're giving instructions for that matter, you need to give some sort of signal so you get your learners' attention. Now, shouting, listen, listen, is probably not the best thing to do. Yeah, it sounds like something has gone wrong or something wild is happening, and you want to maintain that position of control and calm as the leader. So one of the things you can do is walk to the center of the class, put your hands on your head, or it could be anything else. Yeah, could be anything else, but you stand there like this, and then you wait for all the kids to do that. You of course have taught them this already, and then when they've done that, you are ready to start. Yeah, nice simple thing to do. Any physical activity. Yeah. And that's really cool. Next thing that you can consider, and I kind of like this, is, and the reason I like it is, one, it's language, and two, it's a soft transition. And in the soft transition, you sing a song. And as you sing the song, the children join in, and then when you end the song, they are ready to begin the next task because you have their focus. So you could sing something like, now it's time to start again, start again, start again. Now it's time to start again, start again. And you have their attention and they're ready to go. Or you can do something simple like a clap. And of course you have pre-taught all of these, and the clap could be something like, and then the kids copy that, they join in and or copy it, and then when they've all done that, you're ready to start from there. You can do a countdown, so you can do something like 5, and you're standing in the front of the class when you do this. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And at that point, they're ready to start. Or another one you can do is just say in a reasonably clear voice, lip sandwiches. And then all the kids go like this. And you have them ready and quiet to listen to your instructions for the next task. Discipline begins with the leader, as in, if you are a good leader and you're demonstrating the characteristics of a good leader, so you're calm, you're clear, you're intelligent, you're organized, you have a lot of empathy, then your learners will want to follow you. If you are a good leader, if you are a good model, they will naturally pay attention to who you are and what you are doing, and they will be trying to be like you. We hope. But the most important part of good discipline is in having a good classroom leader, the good classroom teacher. The support for that is in having good routines. Now, we've given you an input already on routines, so you might want to revise that or review that. But essentially what happens in routines is that you give your learners a certain set of behaviors, a certain pattern that means that when they go into the classroom, they know what they're going to do. And because they know what they're going to do, because they know what is expected, they tend to behave according to that. When you have rules, and we're going to look at these a little bit more detail, but when you have rules, be consistent in the application of those rules. If you're going to make any exception, then explain why you are making that exception so that everyone knows the rules don't change. When you're wanting to engage a learner more directly, look them directly in the eye with a long stare. That's quite powerful, isn't it? It reminds me of a line in a famous English poem in which goes like this: he holds him with his glistening eye, the wedding guest stood still and listens, like a 3 years child, the mariner hath his will. So holding a child's eyes with your eye is a very good way of getting focused attention and discipline. Of course, for the rest of the time in the class, you do a lot of looking, yeah? You make sure that you're making eye contact with each and every student on a regular basis. That way, they know they cannot hide from you. The other thing that you want to be aware of is providing good rewards for your learners. Now, ultimately, the best reward is the success in the task. Yeah, so if they dance or they sing a song or they do some writing, comment directly on that. Comment on their work, comment on their effort, and give them praise for their effort. Not necessarily the result, but for the effort. And that's a powerful thing to do. The other rewards you might consider, which are very popular, are gold stars. I personally like gold stars, especially when people give them to me. But if you can give kids gold stars or draw smiley faces or anything, there's a whole number of different techniques, but signal that you're going to reward good behavior, and that will really help your discipline in the classroom. If we want learners to follow rules, they need to know what they are. So best strategy for you as a teacher is to go through each of the rules that you want for your classroom. And I've got a list here that you can use or modify as you wish, but make sure they know what they are. For younger learners, in fact, for most learners, support these rules with pictures. So come to class on time might be a clock. Yeah, but have some pictorial support for these so that the learners can easily remind themselves of what they are. Now make sure you go through each of the rules, not all in one day, but go through each of the rules so that your learners know what they are. Yeah, revise them periodically so that they are at the top of their heads. And of course, if a child breaks a rule or the class breaks a rule, then you refer to the rules. Normally, very good practice to have the rules on the wall. Yeah, put them in a frame or something, write them in Chinese, put them on the wall so that the kids know exactly what they are. And when they break a rule, then you can say, what is rule number 5? For example, and then the kids will read that out or check it, and then you've got their awareness that in the classroom, you as the teacher know the rules, they as the students know the rules, and together you're going to apply them. The first step in giving good instructions is to signal that you're going to do that. And we've addressed those signals a little bit earlier in what you do when you're changing the stage in a lesson. So you've given your signal of what's going to happen, and then you speak with fewer words. You change your voice so everyone knows something different is happening. So speak with fewer words and speak them very clearly. Then when you give your instructions, break them down. So for example, listen, and when I say go, I want you to do 3 things. The first thing is I want you to stand up. The second thing is I want you to turn to your partner. The third thing I want you to do is to talk about your family. So in that, you have given staging, you have physically modeled what you're going to do, and you have said it very clearly. But of course, if it's complicated, you feel that the kids aren't going to get that, then you get 2 students to come to the front, you explain to them, check with them, and then get them to model what the task is. Of course, after you've given your instructions, you check them. Yeah. So what's the first thing you're going to do? Stand up or sit down? Okay, stand up. What's the second thing you're going to do? Show me. And then they all go like that. Yeah. And what's the third thing you're going to do? And they will call out, talk about my family. And that's exactly what you want to do. So if you want good, clear outcomes in a lesson, you have good, clear instructions, good, clear task, and you check them. When our learners are very young, we have to pay close attention to their concentration span. And because of this, we need to change our activities very regularly. So it could be 5 to 10 minutes, and then when that 5 to 10 minutes is up, then we go through a change in stage or a change in pace, and we move on to the next one. So key thing for young learners is change the task as often as is necessary to keep their focus. Second thing that we want to be aware of with young learners is the pace. So the pace can be sometimes referred to as stirrers or settlers, is the variety in tasks that require more or less energy, more or less speed. So if you've got the kids doing lots of TPR, for example, which is a very physical activity, very stirring, and the energy is quite high, and maybe they go a little bit funny, then you sit them down and maybe they can do a drawing, or maybe they can listen to a story. So change the pace so that you keep control. Not a good idea to have a class that's all full of activity, and not a good idea to have a class that's all full of sitting down and being quiet. Now, remember that what we know about young learners and what we mention on a number of occasions on this course, repetition is one of the secrets to learning well. So repeat, review, revise. If you have done something in a previous lesson, take an opportunity to talk about that. Yeah, just use pictures from the previous lesson. Don't make it so much a test as a review, yeah, an opportunity to revisit what they've done. Take opportunities to revise vocabulary, revise general topics, so that the learners not only are remembering things, but you're increasing their level of active vocabulary. You will know from your own experience that the younger the learner, the more you have to be like a parent, even perhaps more like a grandparent, someone who is not in a hurry, someone who doesn't have any pressure, but someone who has time and a willingness to just be with children and play with them and guide that play, guide that fun that they're having towards learning. The more you can make learning appear like a game or appear like play, the more children will engage with it and the more they will learn. So make sure that what you're doing with your learners is as close as you would like it to be if you were a child at home. So your manner needs to be relaxed, comfortable. You need to be a very warm and kind and personable presence, because if you're doing that with very young learners, they will open up to you and start modeling their language and their behavior on who you are. We like using them and kids like using them, and if we understand a little bit more about why, then we're going to feel more comfortable in using them. So things like songs, rhymes, chants are a key part of your set of techniques as a teacher of very young learners. But why? Why are they so good? Well, one of the reasons they're so good is kids really like doing them. Yeah, they like doing chants, they like songs, they like rhymes, and the big part of why that is a benefit is those things are a natural part of their language learning process, and in them they get sound, they get rhythm, they get melody, they get vocabulary, and they also get a whole bunch of phrases that are useful for them in their future life and current life as language learners. So songs, chants, rhymes, really good things to do. And I'll make sure that we've got a nice big list of those that you can use. Great sources for that on the internet. Don't be tempted to teach very young learners reading or writing. It's a waste of time and also may have some negative effect on their engagement in language learning. You can read to them, and that's really important. And we mentioned this at other parts in the course, where when you read to kids, you can have great voice, you can, have really good gesture, you can really engage them in listening to the reading that you're doing. Of course, you can do big book reading where you show them what you're reading to them so that they can see the characters. You can ask them questions to engage them more. But when they're very young learners, don't focus on reading. Read to them, but don't try to teach them reading. So what you can focus on, and you know that this is very important already, is focus on listening. Remember that if you speak clearly and accurately and well to them, they are getting what they need to acquire language. So you can get them to listen to audios, really good start. You can get them to listen to audio books where they have pictures and words so they get meaning. Try not to just put on a video and have the kids sit and watch it, because there's no task and no reason for looking at it, and it becomes pretty empty use of classroom time. So if you're giving them something like a video, give them a little task beforehand. Is Johnny happy at the end, for example? Give them a reason to focus on listening. Remembering too that when they're listening, they won't be acquiring words, because there's a chance they won't hear individual words, but what they will be hearing is the sound of the language, the natural rhythm of the language, and they will be hearing phrases. And if they're learning phrases, we know that they're starting to develop an idea of the grammar of English language. One of the things we need to be aware of as teachers of very young learners is the temptation to teach them single words. Sure, they do need to know those single words, but think about their mother tongue, yeah? Think about their natural language acquisition. They don't hear single words very often. Sure, they hear them sometimes, but most of the time those words are part of phrases like go to toilet, yeah, eat some food. All of those are little phrases that kids not only understand, but when they experience them, they're experiencing the grammar of the language. So if you're teaching something like something children are interested in, which is food and animals and other such things, when you're teaching those, sure, you want to make clear what the fundamental thing is, if it's banana, for example. But you don't want to be teaching banana, yeah? You don't want to do that. You want to be teaching this is a banana, yeah? Or I like bananas, yeah? Or the banana's yellow, the banana's yellow, yeah? You want to deliver language in phrases so that the children are getting exposure to the structures and are developing awareness of what the grammar of the language is. Bear in mind too that because these kids are very young, they're going to be interested in very young things, yeah? So lots of food, family, body parts, a little bit of color, animals. Kids are always really interested in animals, which is because they're very close to them. Yeah, so when you're teaching, make sure the vocabulary that you're teaching is in keeping with what they are interested in. You will know by now that when you're teaching very young learners, try to make it as real as possible. I know that there are schools out there that have got specially designed rooms in which kids can pretend they're in the post office and that sort of thing, and that's just great. If you don't have those, well, then there's lots of other things you can do. You can bring in props, so if you're going to tell a story with Little Red Riding Hood, bring in a little red hat, or do something similar. If you're talking about fruit, bring in fruit. So as much as possible, you want to make the class real. Children are good at imagining things, but sometimes if you have too many things that are a little bit empty in terms of meaning, then you're going to lose engagement. So number one, make it real. Number two, when you're making it real, make sure it's got good context, because context creates meaning. So if you've got anything that you've brought in, talk about it, talk around it, talk about where you got it, talk about things that you can do with it, and of course let them be part of that description. Make sure also that you take as many opportunities as you can to tell stories. Now, traditional stories are really good because, as you know already, and I think you probably know already, stories are rich in context. They're rich in meaning that you probably cannot explain, but that children work out when they're reading the story. And there's lots of opportunities in stories for you to add richness to the language. So read them stories if you like. If you think you have a talent, write your own stories, put their names in the stories, and then you get a greater level of personal interest in it. So for young learners, you know already lots and lots of very good things to do for very young and young learners, remembering that the key thing in terms of classroom management is your leadership. And the thing that's next of importance in everything you do is make the language meaningful. You may have opportunity in your life as a teacher to teach other adults, to help them achieve more in English language. And when you do that, you need to recognize that adults, and I know you know already, but adults are quite different from young learners. Now, when you're looking at adults, remember that adults probably, for most people, have a higher level of organization, so they can do things like organize their learning, they can plan it, they can set targets, you can agree targets with them, which makes them very different from young learners. So with adults, that organizational skill is a really big contribution to their capacity to learn. So that's number one. Number two is that with adults, they're good at setting their own targets. So they will know what they want to achieve and in what particular area they will want to achieve. We'll look at this in a little bit more detail later. Adults will also be better, as a general rule, at memorizing vocabulary. They may not be brilliant at the grammar, but their capacity to remember words is probably going to be greater. If you can give them some help with that, show them memorization techniques, well then that will be really good for them. They will probably have trouble with grammar because they may have an approach to language which is based on analyzing the grammar. And that's quite different, as you know, from young learners who kind of drink the grammar. Yeah, they drink it, they get to know the taste, and then they're fine after that. Adults have more difficulty and a natural approach to acquiring grammar. So you may need a little bit more grammatical explanation in your lessons when it comes to grammar. They will have some negative influence from old errors. So if they've been making a mistake in language for a number of years, probably they are going to continue making it. So you'll have to think of particular techniques that will help them to highlight those errors and help them to focus on removing them. So those old errors will be issues. They will also have issues to do with fluency. Now fluency, which we may or may not know, has got something to do with clear meaning, quick response time, yeah, and reasonable word speed. So if you're an adult learner and you're not that familiar with language, your fluency is probably going to be quite low. So you'll have to think of ways in your teaching in which you help them to build their fluency. And we mentioned some things about this in other parts of the course about voice recording, etc., etc. So the thing that you probably want to take some comfort in is that there are a lot of really good language learning apps out there, and these very much suit adult learners. So you can find a good app for learning English, and it could be for learning phrases, learning vocabulary, doing listening, and so on. There's lots of them, and a lot of them are free. You could recommend those to your learners. So in terms of adult learners, you will have different challenges, but bear in mind adults will also have particular strengths. As we have mentioned, adults have much clearer ideas of why they want to learn a language, and what you need to do in relation to that is ask the questions so that you can identify those needs and then teach according to them. So once you have got that first step, you want to analyze your learner. So you want to listen to their language or read what they have written and look at what particular parts of that language need a little bit of work. You probably early on want to reference something like Swan and Smith, where you can get a list of the challenges that that learner will have with English. So if their mother tongue is Chinese, then you can go to Swan and Smith will tell you exactly what kind of challenges someone whose mother tongue is Chinese will have when they're learning English. This can also be a really useful piece of information for you to share with your learner. You might also want to find out what other language learning experience they have had. Have they learned other languages? How did it go for them? What can they tell you about the learning that worked for them or didn't work, as the case may be? You want to find out when and where they want to use the language. So are they going to be using it at work, or are they using it for other reasons? When you identify that, of course, then you can design your lessons around that to build their motivation to learn it. The other thing that you want to look at is what is their preferred method for learning language. Do they in fact like reading a lot? If so, then you will want to use reading as a way of developing their vocabulary, and that's perfectly good. You also want to find out what their strengths and weaknesses are as learners, and when you have found out what those strengths and weaknesses are, then you can help identify those as well. So for teaching adults, the key thing in the first place is good analysis, so that after that analysis you can meet their needs as language learners. The analysis for the kind of learning which an adult is doing has to be very fine, has to be very detailed. So if your learner has got a preferred interest in improving their listening skills, you need to find out what kind of listening they're going to do and where. So what is the context for that listening? And then once you've identified that and you've identified the genre, then you can go to a number of different listening sites, for example, and then give them guidance on which part to access and which part to use. Obviously, if it's conversational, then that's different. But when they're doing listening, you need to make sure that they're not just doing listening. You know, in the same way that you might watch television without paying much attention to it. You need to give them tasks when they're listening. So listening for gist or general meaning, and then listening for detail. So make sure there are good questions that they're going to answer. Also make sure that you are challenging them to listen for phrases and then decode those phrases so they hear all the words. We know that if adults have some old errors, it's probably because their brains have stopped accepting certain sounds as being part of language. You want them to be aware of that. So things like listening and transcribing are a very good skill for adult learners who want to improve their listening skills. Obviously, there's much more than that, but this is a series of techniques or bits of guidance that you can use if you're considering teaching adult learners. Now, if you have an adult learner and they want to develop their speaking skill, once again, you have to think about the context in which that occurs. Yeah. So what kind of speaking do they want to do? Is it they're a parent and they want to speak English with their teacher? Yeah, you can think about that, and you can think about the language that normally goes through that and clarify it for them and practice it. Or are they going to a conference? And when they go to a conference, are they wanting to improve their delivery in English at the conference? What you will do there is search the net for models of good speakers at conferences, look at how they speak and what they say, and see if you can give your learner good guidance on what to focus on for that. So think carefully about what kind of speaking they want to do. Generalized speaking will not keep your adult learner motivated. You must know what they want to use it for. When you're looking at speaking skills for an adult learner, clearly you will look at fluency, and in that fluency you'll look at quite a lot of repetition. So you might consider going through a long list of questions, and there are lots of good lists of questions that you might ask your learner and hear their reply. And then of course you're going to ask them again and again so that they develop fluency in their response. You're also going to look at accuracy in their speaking, and as I've mentioned already, one of the best ways to do this is for them to record their voice, transcribe it, and then together you check it. You make sure it's correct, it's natural, and then of course after they've done that they re-record it and listen to it. So that's a really nice way of addressing accuracy. If you've got a learner who wants to develop good reading skills, you need to find what genre. Do they want to develop good reading skills in novels? Yeah, or academic papers or school reports or business or whatever. You need to find out what that genre is, and also within that you need to find out what they want to get from that reading. One of the biggest areas in this is that learners will tend to want to read too high and too hard stuff. When you do, it doesn't work very well for the brain because you spend so much time figuring out individual words that you lose meaning. Much better if you have an adult learner who wants to improve their reading skills to take them through graded reading so that they get better at, say, A2 level, then B1 and B2 and so on. Okay, so when they're doing their reading, make sure that they're also dealing with questions. And those questions are once again gist or detail or many others, opinions, reading into the story or the text, writing summaries, all that sort of stuff. So once again, with adult learners, whether it's with listening, speaking, or reading, your analysis is very important, and the analysis should be based in the first place on what their particular needs are. If you have a learner who wants to develop good writing skills, you probably have your biggest challenge. You can spend quite a lot of time developing good writing skills, and of course in the first instance what you will do is you'll find what genre. So are they writing papers? Are they writing reports? Are they writing to friends? Is it a matter of doing something better in WeChat? So find out what it is they will need to write in, because each one of those will have different levels of formality and different levels of accuracy required. In WeChat, in WhatsApp, and lots of social media, many people, lots and lots of perfectly capable people write things with mistakes in them, and that's completely accepted, because we know that maybe you're using voice transcription or you're doing it quickly. We don't worry about it too much. What does become a problem is if the meaning is not clear. That can have a lot of big problems further on. But in terms of writing, my recommendation would be that one, you find out what kind of writing your adult wants to do, and two, once you've done that, do a little bit of homework, jump on the net, find an app. I think Grammarly.com is very good, and if you use Grammarly.com, really you can solve a whole bunch of your writing problems very quickly. And I'm not suggesting that because I'm lazy or I think you can cheat. It's not about that. It's about how much time you want to spend getting good at writing when you can get an app to help you get to a high level very quickly. Obviously, depending on the genre, an app like Grammarly.com would be very good. If you're looking at other things like poetry or writing short stories, then that's different. You will need fairly specific skills in that. What you might consider as a teacher is that you get your learner to write something for you in an area in which they're interested, and then you can do the analysis. So in that analysis, you can look at the syntax. So how good is the word order? Yeah. How much sense does the overall writing make? How clearly is it paragraphed? How well are sentences within paragraphs linked? How well are the paragraphs linked across the structure? There's a lot to learn in writing, and later in the course we have more detail on how to do that. Let's take a little look now at vocabulary. Let's bear in mind that if someone says, I want more vocabulary, then you're going to have to find out what they're going to use it for. Yeah, is it conversational vocabulary? Is it reading vocabulary? Is it writing? What is it? There's lots of good lists you can get. The West's General Service List is very good for this. The most frequent 2,284 words in English, which you can work through, or the Academic Word List, Avril Coxhead, very good for those who want to work on more academic topics. So for vocabulary, look at the use and also look at the range. So to what extent do they need more vocabulary? Obviously, the more high the level in academic work, well then the more vocabulary they will need. Bear in mind that if you want to develop good vocabulary, there's no better thing to do than to read a lot. And try and encourage your learners to work through graded reading so that they get better and faster, and that way their vocabulary will increase, but also the flexibility will increase as well. When you're teaching an adult, as we have mentioned already, you will need to find what their needs are, and then you will have to try and meet them. can be a bit of a challenge if you have to make new material. And I wouldn't recommend that. The time cost is just too great. So in terms of material, there's 2 or 3 different approaches you can take. One I recommend is use good language learning apps or good language learning websites, great resources, and there's a load out there that will help with your language learning. See if you can find a good syllabus. The syllabus could be one that's adapted from one of the international or local exams. The great thing in a syllabus is, of course, that it will be balanced so that you will get a reasonably good balance in terms of things like the grammar, the vocab, and the range of skills. Though, of course, you will need to adapt that for your particular learner needs. If you're looking at a learner that wants a 4-skill achievement, then you could probably go for one of the Cambridge exams. You could start with the Young Learner exams, though that's probably not the case for adults. And then you can work your way through FCE, CPE, or CAE rather, CPE, IELTS, and so on and so on. So a lot of good exams. Those exams usually come with a good book, and that will save you a lot of time and effort. If you're looking at really listening and speaking, well, then you could look at something like the Trinity, Jesse exams. Those come with a syllabus as well, and there are also courses available online that you might get some help from on that. Probably in order to save your life and save your time, the key thing would be 1, get a good syllabus, and 2, get a good book and adapt that. And that will solve your material problems. If you want to keep your adult learner happy and keep them learning, give them tests. I know that sounds strange, but when you have a test, you get a record of what their achievements are. And there's lots of good tests, and we'll talk about those later in the course. But you want to test so that you can demonstrate to them that they have improved. Very easy for people when they are adults and learning to be unable personally to measure what their improvement has been. So give them tests and keep a record of those tests. Also keep a record of your lessons so that you can go through at various points and remind them what they have learned, give them summaries, or better still, they give you summaries of what they've learned so that you've got a good awareness of how much they have achieved. Make sure that you're keeping a record of their achievements. You might get them to do little performance tests every now and then, whether that's speaking or writing, and then you can grade that and use it as a measure. So you want to show evidence to your learner that they have learned. You want to show evidence that they have improved, and when you do that, you will have a happier learner and an adult that will be more committed to learning. So for the moment, that's the end of this quite extensive input on young learners, very young learners and adults. I would recommend that you take a little bit of time to think about this and then move on to the quizzes that we talk about a little bit more in the next slide. So thank you very much for your attention, and see you next time.